Hello, I'm Mark Payne, and this is History Alive. History Alive is a program of the West Virginia Humanities Council that brings historical figures to life through portrayals by presenters who have conducted thorough research into their character. These presentations are both entertaining and educational. The Humanities Council makes these characters available to nonprofit organizations across West Virginia, such as schools, libraries, historical societies, and a wide range of civic groups. The presentation fee is paid by the council, and we ask only that their travel costs be covered by the host group. History Alive is designed as an interactive experience between the character and the audience. We encourage your organization or school to host a presentation and bring a figure from history for a visit with your audience or your students. Having someone like Robert E. Lee or Ann Bailey come to speak to your group can really breathe life into these historical figures and make them seem more real. Nothing compares to the live in-person visit. Each presentation consists of 3 parts: a monologue, a question-answer session with the character, and then the presenter breaks character to answer questions about he or she conducted their research. The 15 presenters on our History Alive roster have researched a variety of sources such as diaries, journals, letters, official documents, autobiographies, and the research of other scholars in developing their character. A History Alive presentation is not a play. It is very much an audience participation event that relies on interaction between the audience and the character. Being able to ask your own questions of these important figures from the past is a unique experience. And it's difficult to reproduce the feel of an actual History Alive presentation here in the studio. Without an audience to ask questions, we will change the format a little bit and have our guests sit with me for a few minutes after the monologue. But we hope to give a sample of how a History Live presentation can add to the offerings at your school or organization. There will be information on the screen at the end of this program for how to contact a Humanities Council about bringing a History Live character to your community. At this time, I would like to welcome today's guest from history. We are pleased to have with us in the studio Mr. Anderson Devil Anse Hatfield.
Devil Anse Hatfield's the name. I reckon you've heard of me. Why, I'm right famous, you know. Of course, I ain't the only famous Hatfield these days. Last year, that'd be 1912, my nephew got himself elected governor of West Virginia, Henry Dee Hatfield. He's a medical doctor too, you know. Henry Dee says that after he's finished being governor, he just might run for that there United States Senate. And I'll bet he wins. So everybody's heard of Devil Anse. Now they've heard of Henry Dee Hatfield, governor of West Virginia. Hatfields are famous folks, you know. Of course, most people think of the Hatfield McCoy feud, and I get lots of questions about the feud. I guess the first question I ever got was, how'd you get that there silly nickname of Devil Anse? Well, the Anse is easy. That's short for Anderson. Now, the devil part, that's a different story. Devil. You know, I think my ma gave me my nickname. Yeah, one day I was coming home, took a shortcut across the ridge. Walking across that ridge, I heard some rustling up in the trees. Looked up there, a big old mountain lion. He jumped right down on top of me. Why, we got into it. We just fit for about 5 minutes, I reckon. And finally, I figured I'd best be getting home, so I grabbed him by the tail. Yes, sir. Whirled him around my head. Yeah. Flung him clean across the Tug River over onto the Kentucky side. Well, when I got home, my ma says, "Anse, look at you, son. Why, your clothes are all ripped and you're scratched and you're bleeding a little bit. What in the world happened to you?" I said, "Oh, just a little old mountain lion." She says, "A mountain lion?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I took care of him. Flung him clean across Tug River over on the Kentucky side." She says, "Well, Anse, you must be the bravest boy in these here parts." I said, "Well, I reckon I am." She says, "Ain't that something? I bet you ain't even afraid of the devil himself, are you?" "Yeah," I said, "I don't reckon I am." She says, well, ain't that something? Ain't a fear of the devil, Anse. Devil? Anse? You get it? Yeah! You know what? There may be another way I got my nickname. You see, I had this cousin, same name as I have, William Anderson Hatfield, except he lived across Tug River on the Kentucky side. You see, Hatfields lived on both sides of Tug River. You had West Virginia Hatfields and you had Kentucky Hatfields. Now, it's true, most of them McCoys lived over yonder on the Kentucky side. Well, this cousin of mine, he happened to be a preacher man. And folks started calling him Preacher Anse. Now that I think about it, you know, it weren't too long thereafter that some folks started calling me Devil Anse. So as to not to get me confused with my cousin, Preacher Anse, over in Kentucky. Yeah, they said that I was about as far from being a preacher man as you could get. So, yeah, I reckon that's how I got my nickname. Well, there's other ways, but I bet I'll tell you some more things about the feud. You know, a lot of reporters come down here from time to time, and they always want to write these big stories about the feud. One of these fellers come by here not too long ago. He says, I'm a reporter from the Charleston Gazette. He says, I want to write a story about you, Devil Anse, about the feud. And I said, well, sure, come on up, sit a spell here on the front porch with us. So he come up and he said, oh, I've got a powerful lot of questions for you. He had a big old notebook and pencil, you know, and he says, I got to get back to Charleston to write this here story, so I ain't got much time. I said, well, shoot. He said, oh, don't do that. He got real nervous. I reckon he thought the feud was still going on. These young fellers, they ain't got no sense of humor. You know, before he started giving me questions, he said, Anse, he said, you know what they say about you Hatfields, don't you? I said, well, I don't reckon I do. He said, well, they say you Hatfields was about the most violent people in America back there in the 1870s and 1880s. I said, well, son, you better watch your tongue. Who you calling the most violent people in America? He said, well, that's what they say about you. I said, well, son, did you ever have any history courses when you was going to school? He said, well, yes, sir. I said, well, son, you should know better than that. 1870s and 1880s, this was terrible violent times. You know, we just finished that there Civil War. That's pretty violent. Then after the war, I had all that Indian and massacre and attacks out there in the frontier and claim jumping wars and fence cutting wars. My goodness, it was violent times. He said, well, that's what they say about you, Devil Anse. I said, well, they's wrong. Let me show you a picture. I got this picture out to show him. I said, see this feller? This here's James A. Garfield, President of the United States. Got himself elected in about 1880. Then a few months later, he was standing in the train station there in Washington. A fella rode up behind him with a gun, shot him right in the back. Yeah. Didn't kill him. He lived a few months, but finally died. I said, son, the President of the United States weren't even safe in 1880. Now, who you calling the most violent people in America? He said, well, Devil Anse, that's just what they say. I said, well, they's wrong. There's violence all over America. Poor old James A. Garfield. He was an Ohio boy just across the river there. You know what? Look at there. He's a right handsome feller, ain't he? Why, you know, he could almost be my brother, couldn't he? Well, this here reporter, he got real nervous. He had to get back to Charleston and write that story. And he said, well, Devil Anse, he says, you got to tell me some things. He says, I want to know how you feel in your heart about old Randall McCoy. I said, oh, I best not talk about Randall. He says, well, you had a feud with him for about 12 years back there, didn't you? I said, oh, we sure did. Let's see, that feud was about, what, 1878 to about 1890. He says, oh, I bet you got some terrible feelings built up in your heart for him. I said, well, I used to. You see, a young feller, about 2 years ago, I got myself saved and baptized. This reporter says, you got saved and baptized? Well, I said, sure, what's wrong with that? He said, Devil Anse, he said, I didn't take you for the baptizing type. I said, well, I didn't either for about 50 years. You folks probably heard of Reverend Dot Garrett, ain't you? He's a primitive Baptist preacher in these parts. Reverend Garrett, he'd come by me in Levice's house every Sunday after church, said the same thing for 50 years. Missed you in church this morning, Anse. Need to get yourself saved and baptized. I said the same thing back to him every Sunday. Oh, I'll get around to it there, Reverend Garrett. I'll get around to it. Well, one day about 2 years ago, he come by, said the very same thing, waved to me as he went on down the road. But I jumped up out of my rocking chair and said, praise the Lord, let's do it today. And I looked down on the road, and he was leaning up against a fence post, holding his heart. I reckon he couldn't believe it. He was going to get to baptize the devil. Yeah. So we went down on there to Main Island Creek, you know. Walked out the creek, and whew, it was cold water. He grabbed hold of me, you know, held his hand in the air. He says, William Anse Hatfield, do you believe? I said, yes, sir, Reverend Garrett, I believe. Boy, he grabbed hold of me, you know, dumped me under that water and pulled me up. Ooh, it was cold. Ain't what that fool done a second time? He grabbed hold of me, held his hand in the air. William Anse Hatfield, in front of God and all these witnesses, do you believe? Well, I said, well, Reverend Garrett, I just done told you I believe. He dunked me under a second time and pulled me up. Oh, it was cold water. You know, I happened to look up on the creek bank there, and they must have been 30, 40 people up there watching my baptism. I reckon they couldn't believe it either. You know, about a week after my baptism, there was some smart aleck fellers running around Tug River Valley. You know what they were saying about me? They was saying that when Reverend Dot Garrett dunked me under the water, they was saying that that water boiled. Water boiled. I reckon they thought I was really the devil. This reporter fellow the other day, he kept looking at his watch. He kept saying, Devil Anse, I need more information. I said, well, son, you know, that feud's been over for, well, about 25 years. You can't expect me to just recollect all this right away. He says, well, let me kind of help you a little bit. He says, they say a hog dispute caused the feud. I said, well, there was a hog dispute back there in 1878. Randall Hatfield, Randall McCoy, oh my Lord, how could I ever say that? Randall McCoy. He was walking down the road over there on the Kentucky side and walked by my cousin Floyd Hatfield's hog pen. Looked in Floyd's hog pen and said, why, Floyd, that's my pig in there. And Floyd says, no, Randall, the only hogs in my hog pen are mine. And, well, Randall says, that one's mine. It's got my mark on its ear. So Randall, he decided to take that there to court. And you remember Preacher Anse I mentioned a few minutes ago? He was also the magistrate over there in Kentucky. And he wanted to be fair, you know, so he got 6 Hatfields and he got 6 McCoys to serve on this jury to see who got to keep his hog, Floyd or Randall. Well, they presented the evidence, you know, and got around to voting. And of course, the Hatfields, they voted first, and they voted for Floyd to keep the hog. I mean, it was in his hog pen over there, weren't it? And then McCoy started voting. First 5 McCoys, they voted for Randall to keep that hog. I mean, it had his mark on its ear, didn't it? And then there was one McCoy feller left to vote. What was his name? Selkirk McCoy. And Selkirk got real nervous about voting. And we noticed his wife went over, and his wife whispered in his ear, and she even poked him in the ribs a couple of times. And finally, old Selkirk says, I'm ready to vote. I vote for Floyd. And he took off running. This reporter says, now, Devil Anse, he says, I know you're getting old. And you said yourself half the time you can't think and can't remember. He said, but you just said a McCoy voted for a Hatfield in the hog trial. I said, well, sure, he did. He says, well, I never heard nothing like that before. I said, well, I just told you Selkirks' wife had a powerful influence on him. He said, well, why would she want him to vote for Floyd Hatfield to keep the hog? I said, son, can't you figure out nothing? Selkirks' wife, before she married Selkirk, she was a Hatfield woman. This reporter says, you mean Hatfields and McCoys got married to each other? I said, well, sure, son, what's wrong with that? Hatfields and McCoys got married to each other before the feud. They got married to each other during the feud. They got married to each other after the feud. He says, well, boy, I just never heard of that before. I said, well, son, there's lots of things you apparently ain't heard of. But if you stick around a little longer the rest of the day, maybe I can spend some time with you and answer some more of them questions about the Hatfield-McCoy feud.
We're back with Mr. Anderson Devil Anse Hatfield from Logan, West Virginia today. Mr. Hatfield, I'd like to welcome you to today's show and appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here with us today.
Well, thank you very much.
In your remarks a few minutes ago, you spoke a little bit about sort of how violent it was in the mid part of the 1800s, and it made me think of, you mentioned the war between the states. What did you do during the war?
Well, fellers down along Tug Fork, we didn't go off and join them big armies. You know, we stayed home. We formed little home guard groups, and most of us were Confederates. And me and my Uncle Jim Vance, we formed a little Confederate home guard group. Called ourselves the Logan Wildcats. Catchy name, eh?
I like that.
And we kind of went on patrol here and there across Tug Fork, and occasionally run into a few of them Union fellers over in Kentucky, which we whooped up on real good.
So were you you fought with the Home Guard then for the duration of the war, pretty much?
Pretty much stayed right there in Logan County. See, now that was Logan County in them days. Logan County went all the way down to Tug Fork. You don't get Mingo County till 1895. See, the feud's over by then.
Ah. Well, after the war ended, how did you make your living there in the area?
Well, most of our income come from timbering. Me and my sons and my brothers, and we cut a lot of timber and made some pretty good money.
Did you cut the timber just there in the county? How wide of an operation did you run?
Well, yeah, mostly in the county, and believe it or not, in them days they'd float that timber on down the Tug Fork all the way to Catlettsburg, Kentucky. There was a big old sawmill down there at Catlettsburg. And yeah, we made right good money doing that.
You mentioned your timbering, which reminds me of the name Perry Klein.
Oh, you better not bring that name up.
Well, too late. I already did.
That scoundrel.
Yeah, well, can you tell me a little bit about Perry Klein and about that particular person?
Well, you know, that good-for-nothing scoundrel. We caught him cutting timber on our land back there in 1878 thereabouts, and so we took him to court. And the judge, who just happened to be a Hatfield, he said, "Mr. Klein," he says, "you can either go to jail, or you can compensate Devil Anse." He says, "Well, I ain't got no money." And so the judge said, "Well, do you have some land yourself?" And he said, "Well, I do have about 5,000 acres of timberland." And the judge says, "That sounds like a good deal. You just sign it over to Devil Anse Hatfield. It'll keep you out of prison." So overnight, I've become a pretty wealthy man. Added that 5,000 acres, Perry Klein, and he got all, lathered up about that and moved over to Pikeville, Kentucky. I even become a lawyer, I think, and I think he was a sheriff of Pike County here for a while. And he's the one that got the feud stirred up a second time.
And when did he stir the feud back up again?
Oh, that was 1887, I believe. The feud about died out, And he got that Kentucky governor, who was a friend of his, to put bounties on our heads. And they started raiding across Tug Fork into West Virginia, trying to take us.
How many members of your family did you lose during the run of the feud?
Well, just 3 or 4. Most of them were McCoys. Of course, the worst thing that happened was my brother Allison. He got killed. And, it was election day back in 1882. And 3 McCoy fellers jumped him on election day picnic afternoon. Killed him. And we captured them 3 McCoys and decided to see what happened to my brother, and he died about 2 days later. So we took him back across Tug Fork to the Kentucky side, tied him up to some pawpaw bushes, and we shot him.
Do you have any idea how many people actually were killed on both sides during the feud?
Best I can remember, about a dozen. About 12. And the feud only lasted, 12 years, so 12 deaths in 12 years, that ain't too bad.
So when, in your mind, did the feud end?
Well, that's pretty easy. The hanging of Ellison Mounts, 19-year-old boy. He was part of the Hatfield clan. We called him Cotton Top. And they hanged that boy over there in Pikeville in 1890. He was involved in that cabin raid. We tried to raid the McCoy cabin, and we were going to kidnap old Randall McCoy to keep him from testifying. But we never got him. But we did happen to kill a couple more of his youngins that night. And poor old Cotton Top paid the price.
So when Mounts was hanged, that pretty much settled the issue?
Yeah, that was, it was 1890 by then. Everybody was tired of the feud. And you see one of your kinfolk up there on the gallows, that sends, cold shivers down your spine.
I can only imagine.
Yes, sir.
Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce the presenter of Devil Anse Hatfield, and this is Dr. Paul Lutes. Paul is professor of history at Marshall University. He is a West Virginia history specialist. And Paul has been on the roster of History Alive. I think you were one of the very original.
Yes, the original troop members back in 1990 or 91.
Yeah, certainly back before my day.
All right.
Occupational hazards.
Yes, yes.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for being here with us today. I want to ask
My pleasure, Mark.
I want to ask you what I ask most all of our visitors here, which is, why Devil Anse? Why the character that you chose? What interested you to?
Well, part of it has to do with my teaching assignments at Marshall. I teach West Virginia history, and students are always very interested in the feud era. And then for several years I took senior citizen groups up to Grandview State Park in the summer to see the outdoor drama. So that and my teaching assignment, and I decided that Devil Anse Hatfield, had a national reputation, and I thought he would be since I was from Southern West Virginia, this would be a good thing to portray.
Right. You certainly understand how History Alive works, and these are not plays.
No.
The folks that do presentations have really researched and done historical research on these characters. How did you go about, what sources, where, if any place, did you go to learn more about Devil Anse?
Well, there are several excellent books. One is by a scholar named Altina Waller, and her book is simply entitled Feud, and it was published in 1988. And it's kind of covers the whole waterfront, as socioeconomic, political aspects of the feud era. And then Otis Rice, who is professor emeritus at West Virginia Tech, he has a book out, Hatfields and McCoys, and it's more of a traditional approach. And then if you go back to the late 1940s, there was another scholar, Virgil Carrington Jones, who had a book out on the feud. And of course, just recently, Bob Spence and Dr. Hatfield's book, Coleman Hatfield's book, has come out. So there's numerous approaches to the feud, and if you kind of dovetail all these together, you can get a pretty good idea of the feud itself.
What, in all the research you've conducted, what do you think started the feud? Was there one single incident? Was it a culmination of several incidents, or what?
Yeah, I think it's a cumulative effect. The Perry Klein incident wasn't feud related initially, but it became feud related. And then the so-called Hog trial, and then there was a romance that went bad with John Z. Hatfield and Roseanne McCoy, and a child born out of wedlock, which died, and then Devil Anse's brother, and this thing just kept snowballing, and it's somewhat difficult to just pinpoint one thing. Probably his brother's death, Ellison Hatfield's death, his murder by the three McCoys. That's probably the general focus. In the remaining seconds that we have here, can you tell us, when did Devil Anse die? What was the circumstances? He died in his bed in 1921 at age, 80, 81. And a couple years after his death, his family raised $3,000 and had a life-size statue carved in Italy. And it's now there in the Hatfield Cemetery at Sarah Ann in Logan County.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Paul Lutes of Marshall University for taking time to be with us today and portraying Devil Anse Hatfield as part of our History Alive program. And I want to thank you for tuning in to History Alive.